We light this candle to represent the light that is available to all of us, to each of us. It is freely offered, and all we have to do is accept it with one tiny whispered yes. Yes to life and love and peace and hope. That tiny whispered yes is all it takes, even when it is drowned out by the loud no that is sometimes around us and sometimes within us. A tiny whispered yes is always stronger than the loudest no. For thousands of years, First Nations people have walked this land. Their relationship with this land was the spiritual center of their lives. We are gathered on the traditional lands of the Nakota people, and we acknowledge and honor their stewardship. May we too honor and respect this land. The mission of St. James United Church is to love God, promote Christian faithfulness, foster a spirit of understanding and service to our community, and to seek strength and grow and change as God calls. Welcome to St. James United Church on this second Sunday after Pentecost. You might be here in Wolseley, or you might be many miles away picking us up through your computer screen. You might be up and doing on Sunday morning, or this could be a Wednesday evening and you're sitting on your Chesterfield in your jammies. It does not matter. What matters is that you are here and that we are together. Our opening prayer and call to worship. Loving God, we are never alone. You are with us Sunday morning and Tuesday afternoon. You are with us when the days are black and nothing seems to be working out. And you are with us when the sun shines and all is well. You are with us, always giving us opportunities to do that one thing that will make the world a better place. A greeting for a stranger, a help to a child, a steady hand on a senior's elbow, a loving word of encouragement to someone in need. We only have to open our eyes to those times when doing your will is presented. We only have to whisper yes, and the world is better than it was before. Amen. Last week, I debated with myself about putting the scriptures from the lectionary onto the Facebook page because I was not sure whether or not I would follow the lectionary this week or take a sidetrack. The lectionary is usually my go-to choice because that way we stay on this 3-year cycle of readings. And this week should be the promise that God gave Abraham and Sarah in their old age, that they would have a son who would be the father of a great nation. That was Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 to 15. This week could also have been Psalm 116, a psalm calling on God during trying times. Or I could have chosen Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 5, where Paul speaks of salvation through faith alone, or Matthew, chapter 9, where Jesus and the 12 disciples sent out the 12 disciples to preach and heal. But last week, 8 of us were disciples here in St. James, studying the book of James. I find the Bible study to be both rewarding and challenging. Rewarding that in that discussion leads to a greater understanding and a deeper conviction. Challenging because discussion makes me think more deeply, to second guess my assumptions, to really think through my theology. You see, the United Church provides very few hard and fast answers. Rather, it challenges us to dig deep into our lives, into our hearts, into the very core of our beliefs, see what's there, and then take action. Now, biblical scholars tell us that James, who wrote that book, was the younger brother of Jesus, and that he led several Christian churches in Jerusalem through the troubled times in the first 20 or 25 years that followed the crucifixion. These scholars tell us that this short letter to the church was the first Christian writing that survived, that he wrote it in about the year 50 CE, and that soon thereafter he was murdered. They also tell us that his thoughts were based on the Sermon on the Mount and the book of Proverbs. The challenge before us in the Bible study, because we are older folk with many experiences but limited time and limited energy that we have to devote to change, the challenge we have is to take what we have and what we know and translate it into action. James, you see, issued that challenge in the second chapter, verse 14. He asks the question, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone has faith but has no deeds?" And later in verse 20, he asks, "Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless?" And because the 8 of us elders live in a world that is currently beset by some huge issues, and we all have had past experiences with these issues, we are challenged to really dig into ourselves and what we are going to do to work toward resolution. Not only has the whole world been infected with a scary, deadly virus that has impacted everyone's life, but recent deaths have pointed out in very real and dramatic ways that systemic racism and discrimination affects every nation, Canada included. It seems that us, them kind of thinking has been part of the human psyche for thousands of years. Recall, if you will, the many stories that the Hebrews, right back to Abraham, tried to keep their monotheistic, their one God faith pure by not associating with their many God neighbors. Jesus was born into a racist, bigoted world. An old Roman saying of the day was, "Thank the fates that I was not born a foreigner, a slave, or a woman." To those of us who were born into white male privilege, we really have to think about how that old Roman sentiment is still relevant today. I was not born a foreigner, a slave, nor a woman, so I've always had a voice. I was not born gay or a different color, so I was never kept in poverty or lost any privileges through an unjust system. Each one of us has come through some trials of discrimination or rejection to get to this day, but it's up to us to take what we went through and multiply it by a factor of 100 or perhaps even 1,000, so that we might begin to understand how the system is designed to keep those guys, the other, subservient. Jesus took that racist and bigoted world and turned it upside down, defying authority. He had the audacity to propose that we love each other, Jews and Samaritans and Gentiles and children and all our neighbors. It's really, really hard to live in a world where everyone has the same rights, the same privileges. It's really hard to live in a world where social justice applies to all equally. It's really hard to live in a world where I can no longer think of myself as somehow being special. Now, this is where James comes in again. In the very first chapter, James speaks of trials we go through that produce character and perseverance. I happen to think that James did not quite go far enough, that he could have also said that the trials we go through contain a lesson for us, a lesson in empathy, that is, the ability to feel another's pain and take steps to relieve that pain. On the one hand, we might think things could be much worse for me. I could have been born a slave or a foreigner or a woman. But we have to go that extra mile, take that extra step, and tell ourselves, God gave me this experience and I hurt. Maybe I'm supposed to do something with this pain. Maybe I'm supposed to reflect on it, on what my brothers and my neighbors are feeling. And then maybe I'm supposed to take action. Remember that James also said that faith alone is not enough, that action is required. I learned a long time ago that every prayer has within it an obligation to take action. So last week, 8 people from this congregation, with a combined age of about 600 years, came together to study the book of James. And we launched into a rowdy and rousing discussion of the current world events, the current conditions, and what we as individuals might do about it, and what actions we might take. We went further and we talked about what our responsibility as a church family is in this mess, and how we as a community of faith might grow to use our experience to help others. We spoke further about the future of St. James United, realizing that looking at the gray hairs that were sitting around that table, that discussion table, and looking around at the gray hairs in the congregation at large, in 10 years, most of those gray heads won't be here anymore. We didn't really study the words that James wrote. We began to consciously live them, imagining a creation that we have been blessed to help develop. And that, my friends, is the joy and the agony of a Bible study. It isn't just a study of dry words that were written thousands of years ago. It's a study of the principles that were established way back then and what they mean today, what they could mean for tomorrow. be very careful of Bible study. Bible studies could create changes and growth that shake us out of our comfortable state and prompt us to take action with all sorts of unseen consequences. Amen. I was going to somehow work into my meditation an acknowledgement of the debt of gratitude we owe to the pandemic and to Donald Trump for forcing us all to dig deep into ourselves and reflect on who we are and what we stand for. The protests that are resulting around the world from the death and injustice suffered by one more of the many people of color has prompted us here in Canada to re-examine our own systemic racial bias and to examine how our laws and our policies and our policing have developed to keep certain numbers of our brothers and sisters in poverty and subjugation. I was also going to make a statement that none of us can become complacent in our privilege, that none of us is any more privileged than the least one in our society, because, you see, we could be next. I was going to somehow include how fear drives authority to overreact and make a bad situation much, much worse. But I didn't have time to do all that in that short sermon, so I'll leave that for the prayers for the people and for us to all contemplate on later today. God, who creates opportunities everywhere and all the time, help our leadership to see the opportunity that is before us, the opportunity to create the positive changes that will benefit the people. Help us to see our part in that positive change toward liberation and social justice, and to remind our leadership of their responsibilities. Help the people who are hurting and in pain to resist the temptation to strike back in anger, but rather to reach out in forgiveness and help those of us who hurt them to see the harm that we have caused. And help those whose job it is to protect to see that there is less to fear than what they think, and that they need not use maximum force as a first course of action. Amen. I apologize for not having listed on the Facebook page a whole bunch of music that you can turn to, but there is one piece that comes out of Africa, sung by a choir in Los Angeles, that is really an amazing piece, Baba Yeda. So as we go out today and this week, may we all see our place in God's world and to decide to take the opportunities before us, the opportunities to grow through love to help other people. Amen.